Today, we'll be looking at a motherboard, CPU, GPU, and RAM combo that I bought for $45. It's the FX 6100. I got a pretty basic motherboard. It only has a 4-pin, 2 DDR3 slots. It came with two 4 gig sticks of DDR3 1333 and a GTX 560. We'll be taking a look at some benches today just to see how it performs. I will be upgrading it in the next video to see how it performs with 16 gigs of RAM and a more powerful graphics card. The 560 is definitely a little bit more limited, but you know, we'll see how it goes. The FX 6100 and Cinebench R20 managed a score of 725. This put it 300 points below the i5 3550. If I could overclock the chip on a different motherboard, it would almost certainly catch up, but at 3.3 GHz, this is all it could accomplish. In Firestrike, it managed a combined score of 2703. If I was able to overclock the FX 6100, it would surely achieve a better score. With some new RAM, a new board or an overclock if possible on this board, and a new GPU, the FX would be held back far less and would be able to really show off its strengths. In Valorant, at 1080p with the lowest settings, it managed to average 108 FPS, which is more than enough for a high refresh rate monitor. It did dip at some points, but I'm sure you could either lower the resolution, overclock the CPU, get some better RAM, etc., and help prevent some of those drops. The GTX 560 and FX 6100 certainly held their own in this game, and you'd have a completely playable experience if you wanted to play this game. In Rocket League, the system managed 66 FPS, but it did have some dips down to the single digits. Now, whether an overclock on the CPU could fix that, or you'd really need to overclock the GPU, or perhaps even bump it up to something a little stronger, I'm not sure, but the FX 6100 is not the binding part. It isn't holding back the GTX 570 at all, and you could absolutely upgrade it, which I will do in the future. League of Legends is a game I haven't tested on this channel before, but due to its popularity, I could no longer ignore it. The GTX 560 and FX 6100 combo managed 121 average FPS. Now, the FPS did drop a bit, but that's to be expected with such old hardware, even in a game like this. Esports games are perfect for a build like this, whether you're playing League, Dota, Valorant, or Counter-Strike. All of them should run on this system. GTA 5 is a staple on this channel due to its popularity. The system managed 73 FPS average, with some drops down to the 30s. This isn't that bad for such an old system. You could happily play this game with these settings, so story mode or online, and have no issues. Driving around didn't incur any major drops, although I'm sure when the action heats up and things start to explode, the frames will drop a bit more. But again, that's nothing some overclocking couldn't fix. If you have a better board than I do, or perhaps better RAM or a better GPU, all of this should perform better. But considering how much I got these parts for, this is a pretty commendable experience. Next up is Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. At 1080p with medium shadows and no FXAA, it did average below 60 at 48 FPS. However, this is still pretty good. It's like a console experience of the game. You could upgrade the GPU and you'd see a definite improvement up to 60 FPS. You may still have some drops, but it would run better than this. The GTX 560 is really starting to show its age and lack of driver support. Some of the games that I booted up really had some issues. Valorant did not like the drivers that it was using, but I couldn't update them any more than they already were. Similarly, Dragon Quest XI at 1080p lowest settings averaged a console experience of about 30 FPS. It did drop a few times, but considering this is a turn-based RPG, I think 30 FPS is perfectly reasonable for a game like this. I'm sure you could have tons of fun playing through this entire game with no issues whatsoever. Other turn-based RPGs should perform similarly if they're a bit older. I'm sure Dragon Quest Definitive Edition would run a little better, considering it using Switch level textures, so it might perform a little better. Up next we have Apex Legends. I did try to play this game since it is competitive, but it only ran at 38 FPS with some major hiccups. I suspect this game might be a little too much for the GTX 570 to handle. The same could be said for the FX 6100, but I feel that with a bit of overclocking and some better RAM, it could definitely push out some more frames. It was capped to 100% at some point in the open world experience, but again, overclocking it perhaps to 4 GHz or a little higher and bumping the RAM speed up to 1600 or 1866 should provide a much smoother experience if you have a more powerful GPU. Last up, we have Dark Souls 3. At 1080p lowest settings, it averaged 31 FPS. This is similar to the game on console. The GTX 560 really just cannot push the frames necessary to play this game above 30 FPS. When the action heats up, I'm sure it'll drop even more. This tutorial area is certainly not too hard on the hardware. The FX 6100 is capable of so much more. I'd say if you had a GT 1030 or a GTX 1050, it would pair really well with the FX 6100, especially if you could overclock it a little, which I cannot do on this board. With a GPU upgrade like that, a lot of these games would be more playable. Not to mention, you'd have up-to-date driver support, and you wouldn't have any frame drop issues quite as hard as the 560. The FX 6100 is definitely capable. If you overclock it a little, it could definitely support a faster GPU. So what do you guys think? I got all this for just $45. If you like the video, subscribe, like, hit the bell, leave a comment down below what you think. I'll be upgrading the system with 16 gigs of RAM and a GTX 680 soon, just to see how it performs. I'd throw a GTX 1050 in there if I had one, but I don't, so the GTX 680 is just going to have to go instead. It's pretty similar in performance to a 1050, maybe a 1050 Ti, but it doesn't have the driver support, so not quite the same. Alright, thank you for watching.